So today's event, a Perpetual class, is an in-conversation between Felicity Allen and Ruth Ewan. It's one of the events that form the classes of our 2021 sitting curriculum program accompanying Ruth Ewan's new exhibition at Cooper Gallery here, which is the first sitting of the Ignorant Art School 5 sittings towards creative emancipation. So in order to set the scene for tonight, I wish to give a brief overview of the Ignorant Art School project. So planned to run for 3 to 4 years, the project comprises new commissions by internationally celebrated artists, including Ruth Ewan, Tanya Bagheera, amongst others, and archival exhibitions that juxtapose significant and underexplored historical and recent experiments in art education and alternative grassroots pedagogical initiatives in the West and the Global South. So the core of the overall project examines the emancipatory and revolutionary aspects of learning and the status of knowledge as a collective and social experience against the backdrop of the ongoing economization of knowledge production in society, assumptions of what knowledge is, how it's formed, mediated, and shared, and how knowledge bears the pressure, indeed the violence of authority and power. So in addition to this focus, the Ignorant Art School is intended also as a site for building communities of care and resistance, which dispute that knowledge, and by extension, the practice of education, is the property of the specialist, the master, the informed, or the wise. So the title, The Ignorant Art School, is inspired by French thinker Jacques Rancière's seminal book, The Ignorant Schoolmaster, in which Rancière recounts the story of Joseph Yoctot, an exiled French teacher who in 1818 formulated a teaching method that dissolved hierarchies in the classroom by stressing learning as a process of doing, not explanation. So this notion of ignorant also takes an inspiration from feminist critic Gayatri Spivak when she described her work as a stream of learning of how to unlearn and what to unlearn. So in this sense, to be ignorant is to be in a state of pure potential, a state of readiness, of being always on the cusp of the new, the radical, and the revolutionary. So indeed, actually, our next sitting number 2, is entitled To Be Potential. So espousing this as its ethos, the Ignorant Art School occupies an institutional space traversed by tensions. It is a school that doesn't offer solutions or answers, but instead strives towards a revolutionary reimagining of what we think we want it to be. So for this, the opening chapter of the Ignorant Art School, we have had the pleasure and the privilege to work with Ruth on developing and realizing our first and very ambitious sitting entitled, We Could Have Been Anything We Wanted to Be, and It's Not Too Late to Change. So for me, it's been very important to start this project with a conceptual and a critical connection to our location, Dundee, foregrounding one of the key messages of the project, the revolutionary potential of education. Ruth has undertaken a meticulously archaeological approach to research that has unpacked Dundee's history of political and social radicalism, grounding the Ignorant Art School in a direct and emotive relationship with this radical city. So besides the city of Dundee, the project has one very obviously important context, that of being situated in a gallery which is part of an art school that embodies a broad spectrum of practices and disciplines. So in this sense, the Ignorant Art School operates as a heterogeneous gathering, a manifestation of Hannah Arendt's notion of a space of appearance as the realm of the politics, where in the words of a feminist writer Bell Hooks, the education is the practice of freedom. So we started sitting with a series of 10 events between February and April called Sitting Curriculum Number 1. This began with a history class, then 2 play classes, a strike class, a beauty class, a slogan class, and a radical pop crawl, amongst others. Most of the events are on our YouTube channel if you're interested. And we're now running an autumn term curriculum, which is a series of both in-person and online events. So you can see the list of events in the handouts we just distributed to you. So it must be acknowledged that the past 18 months have been extremely challenging, particularly that we're developing what is perhaps the biggest project ever at Cooper Gallery. But on the positive front, it gives us time to develop Ruth's exhibition into such an incredibly ambitious feast for the eyes and mind. So now I'm more than thrilled to introduce the protagonist for this evening's event, artist Ruth Ewan and Dr. Felicity Allen, who will be discussing the intentions and the inspirations and the scoring this exhibition, as well as the histories and the debates around education and knowledge. So just quickly to introduce the 2 speakers. First of all, Felicity Allen is an artist, educator, and a writer working across the studio, the social, and the institutional. And she is the editor of Education, the Whitechapel and MIT publication, Documents of Contemporary Art Series, which is an important tool book for the conceptualization of the Ignorant Art School project. And Felicity is a founder member of the esteemed Women's Art Library in London and led the public engagement programs in the Hayward Gallery and the Tate Britain for over 11 years. And Felicity now returned to her artistic practice after the work at the Tate. And if you want to find more about Felicity's artistic practice, you can go to her website. And Ruth Ewan is an internationally celebrated artist whose research-led and critically engaged practice has drawn attention both within contemporary art and socio-political history. Engaging with the circulation of radical ideas and social movements, her work explores the processes by which ideas take form and spread from individuals to society. So Ruth has shown extensively at major venues internationally, including Edinburgh Art Festival, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, Museum of Contemporary Art in Bordeaux, National Museum of the History of Immigration in Paris, Vienna Museum, Sao Paulo Biennale, Tate Britain, Dundee Contemporary Arts, and New Museum in New York, amongst others. So now, without further ado, I shall give the floor to Ruth and Felicity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I think, well, first of all, let me just say huge congratulations on this amazing exhibition. I think it's really inspiring. And I was saying to you before that because I come from the southeast of England, that's where I have come from, I was only able to see it online until today, in fact. So I hadn't heard the voices. I knew that they were there, but I hadn't heard them yet. And coming into this space, I got so much more out of it than I could possibly have imagined through the images that I was seeing online. And I really appreciate the work. It's very, very interesting. And one of the things that I found that, to my surprise, is that, well, not necessarily to my surprise, but I hadn't been thinking about it, was the actual space in which, so when I saw the photographs, I saw the, what should we call it? The planting, let's say, the garden, what do you call it?
I don't know what to call it. It was going to be a meadow and then it didn't turn out to be a meadow. So
okay, the non-meadow, the post-meadow, the beyond meadow.
Landscape.
The landscape. When I saw that, on this remarkable and beautiful 1950s floor, which, because I was born in the 1950s, I know it's 1950s. I can recognise it because it's like the first familiarity to me, almost. It meant so much more, because one of the things that this floor tells us, and obviously this space tells us, is that it's about public space, and it was built at a time when people were consciously, when architects were very consciously making public space in a sense that was publicly owned public space rather than privatised public space. And that became much more evident to me as part of the work when I was in the space itself. So I just wanted to start by congratulating you, and I want to come back in a bit talking about some of the kind of issues about developing it that have been both good and bad in terms of lockdown and COVID and so on and so forth, but maybe we can come back to that in a bit. First of all, I just want to ask you to say a little bit about your practice as an artist who is a producer, and talk about how that maybe evolved a bit and what it means to you.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I'll come to that. I just want to say, first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming and making the effort to come. This is probably the first time I've done any kind of event with a real life audience for nearly 2 years, so it feels really lovely, and lovely to actually talk in person and not be on Zoom. As much as I enjoyed our foray into digital worlds, I never thought I would become so familiar with Zoom presenting as well out of my comfort zone. But this is more within my comfort zone, speaking with real life people, so thank you for coming. So being a producer, I would never use that word to describe myself, but I realise that is what I do. So, it's bringing things together, it's working through different mediums, it's often going into something, a subject area that perhaps I don't even know particularly well, and getting up close with it, or I collaborate with people a lot, so I often bring someone in who's perhaps an expert from a particular field, whether they're a historian or an activist or a child, and there's that sort of element of inviting something to happen that I guess is what a producer does. But yeah, I wouldn't call myself that. I just think of myself as an artist, and I know there's so many artists now that describe themselves as, artists, activists, architects, all these like multiple occupations. I don't do that. I just refer to myself as an artist. That is my house, as it were.
One of the things, I'm desperate to talk to you about the making of this work, but before we get there, can I just ask you something about the role, the part that pedagogy has in your practice? And would you consider pedagogy to be a medium that you work with, for instance?
Yes, I would. Although I also wouldn't call it pedagogy, but I think I've taken, the way my work's evolved. I started off, I studied drawing and painting at Edinburgh College of Art, and it was quite formal. So in the late 90s, it was quite formal, traditional department. It was very male dominated. It was very much about making painterly marks on canvas and relishing those marks. And there was anatomy lessons, and there was life drawing 3 times a week. And it was, but within that, there was a certain degree of freedom as well. And so I started, experimenting with different things and creating artworks in public space. Actually, when I was at art school, in a very minor way. I don't think I quite realised at the time what I was doing. It was quite instinctive, but I started putting things in the street, setting up, I guess, what you would call a sort of relational kind of practice, doing sort of actions and things like that. And I often realised I couldn't do those things on my own, so I brought other people into it. And then as I tried to kind of survive post-art school, as I tried to survive as an artist and had various jobs and in the art world, doing things like invigilating or being part of other arts performances and so on, I was able to finally give up my day job, which was in sort of publishing organisation, and because I started working or getting commissioned as an artist working within education, within galleries and museums, and that, to put it bluntly, it pays better than being a straight up artist, you know, because you can say on paper, I've done this number of workshops, you know, the commitment with this school was this long, and you know, it paid. So I was able to quit the day job, which was part-time, and do these sort of education projects that I have to say I don't see happening in Scotland at all.
Really?
Yeah. I think it was a period in time as well where there was a lot of projects like that being commissioned in London through various galleries, public galleries.
When are we talking about? 90s?
No, so round about 2006, and the sort of 5 or so years after that. So, different organisations who would, you know, they'd have their main commissioning programme, and here and down here, they would have their education programme, which brought in quite a lot of money from corporate money sometimes into these public institutions. So they'd be often have a corporate sponsor or something, but yeah, with public galleries, and so I did a number of like school residencies and things like that, and I definitely valued that work as whether it would describe it as pedagogy or education or outreach or whatever they want to label it as. I valued that as a medium. It was part of my practice, and it was as valuable as any object that I would make and put in the gallery space. Often more valuable, actually, and because I felt like it was the thing that wasn't inert. You know, the thing in the galleries often feels inert, but the relationship, the real life experience, the interaction, especially with younger people, felt of value and significance and really meaningful. I felt like some really meaningful exchange happened. And then I guess I realised that that element of my practice wasn't necessarily seen by other people as art or as, you know, something as valuable. And I remember having someone, I mean, this was probably about 12, maybe 11 years ago, someone was commissioned to write an essay on my work. And it was one of the first times I'd had people write about particular projects, but I hadn't had anyone whose writing I really liked write about a sort of overview. And I was really excited about it. And then I read it, and I was like, well, why haven't they mentioned like these 3 really big projects that I've done? And then I was like, oh, it's because they see them as like down here.
Add-on.
They're add-on, they're education. They're somehow like ancillary to all this, you know, other stuff. And I suggested that they include them because I felt like they were, you know, there was an outcome, they were authored by the artist, although there was this whole sort of participatory and collaborative element, they were still highly authored, and they were just kind of typexed out of the equation.
What I love about this, I mean, obviously I don't love it, but is the fact that one of the things that if you're doing the kind of work that you're doing, and that I would, you know, I relate to, I identify with as an artist, is that you are actually involved in enabling voices to be heard that might and content of voices, as it were, to be heard that might not be heard otherwise. So to then have that silenced again is a beautiful bit of Kafka going on here.
Yeah, well, there's certainly an irony there of like the voice, you know, looking at the voices of the overlooked, and then that in itself becomes overlooked.
So did that okay, this is another question I got for later, but I'm going to bring it in here, because that moment of friction could have led to something developing in your practice, maybe, or not.
I don't think it necessarily did. I mean, I had around that time I decided to make, well, changes happened in my life. You know, I had children, and I found I didn't quite have as much time to do these sort of education type projects. I didn't have the energy to do them, to be honest, because I was like stretching myself like massively. And so I kind of slimmed down what I was doing. I had to prioritise things that I was doing. But then I moved out of London as well, and those sorts of opportunities just, I think they exist more in institutions in London that have, you know, education departments or have this sort of structures. I mean, museums up here just don't really operate in the same way. Like there's very little schools programme.
Really?
Completely. Completely not.
Can I refer for a moment to that book, Education, that you mentioned? Because in that I've included in, it's a peculiar book which I'm not going to talk about in any depth, but I just want to, what you've just told me surprises me, because in 1976, I think, someone whose name I'm temporarily forgetting, but who I've included in the book, she was an important video maker in the 1970s and 80s. So that was at the vanguard of making video. She was writing for, I think it was Studio International, which I quoted, and she was talking about Third Eye, as it was, the gallery in, which became CCA eventually, in Glasgow, and also I think it was Aberdeen Museum, and the very radical and interesting programs that both places were putting on, and she was calling for the development of education programs and kind of participation programs in order to help people understand and connect with these really radical programs. And the reason I put it in the book, partly to honour her, and I'm sorry I can't remember her name, but she's in there, because actually she hasn't been remembered and credited as much as she should have been, but also because in the 2000s, when you were doing your work in London, and I was then running education programs at the Hayward and Tate Britain just for 10 years, I found myself having arguments with the younger generation about the value of gallery education. And a lot of them were saying, oh no, it's all radical work done by artists who are socially engaged, and gallery education is just this kind of add-on sub-genre kind of thing to the museum. And I've written a lot about this, but I wanted, apart from anything else, there was an issue around cancelling out the history of the development of gallery education, which actually went much further back to, so the people were arguing that it was a kind of government instrumentalisation of art, basically. And actually it had been absolutely called for from the 70s by people like this person whose name, I will eventually get the name, but for the moment I can't. And that it had got this whole history, which was actually a really radical history. And loads of interesting stuff was done with working with children to curate exhibitions from permanent collections and so on and so forth from the 1970s onwards. So anyway, I'm just filling in because of course it's largely written out, that history, and so I've overlooked, and I think it's really interesting that you raise it in that way. But also I completely understand the ways in which one of the things that I would say about what you've done in terms of your work is to actually go beyond what many more sort of socially engaged gallery education programs do in lots of ways by doing the kind of multiplicity of work that you do that I called production. So I want to ask you now about the development of this particular work here, because I think it's a really interesting development. Something that I found really, when we were talking earlier, I found really moving actually, was you talking about, very respectfully, about the group of people you've been working with here and the team and how they were able to help you in with their different skills and support and so on. And I found that, I think that relationship between an artist and an institution is so important. And one of the things I just wanted to note was, quite often nowadays administrators get sacked because people are thinking everything can be done with technology. And you made the point about the fact that you had technical help, curatorial help, and administrative help in realising this project. And I want to celebrate the administrative help in that, because it is getting so, it is generally a female role, often a female role, and it gets overlooked over and over again.
Yeah. Well, so I guess because the period in which we had, I mean, I'm quite a slow worker anyway. I have to say, I don't mean a slow worker in that I don't produce much. I mean, I'm slow in that I like to take a long time to develop ideas and really get into the nitty-gritty of a place and allow things to percolate. And so in a way, you know, lockdown for me, you know, I had it pretty good, other than going slightly and staying at home with my kids. In that it gave me time. I had projects cancelled, which were awful. It was pretty awful, pretty annoying, and a lot of stuff kind of, I felt like a sort of carpet had been pulled out sometimes. But we had this, you know, we started talking about this project before lockdown, and then it was able to develop and be fluid and responsive, and having that extra time meant that and doing these Zoom events and things, it meant I got to know the team here, which is, most of you know, I'm sure, it's a team of 3 people, plus other support staff as well. And I came to realise that they were very much there to support from all angles. And a lot of the time, you know, I get asked to do a piece of work or produce something for a context, and then I kind of figure out the support system needed for that. But there was this small but well-formed support system there, and so I was able to, I sort of changed and adapted the idea for the work that was going to go in here, and it became something more involved and more ambitious. And as I said to you earlier, you know, in terms of technical, like anything to do with sort of AV and sound, I'm kind of at sea, but knowing the technician here, who's really more of a producer, Eileen, was so good at all that stuff, I was able to say, well, actually, could we, if I wanted to record people and do some interviews with people from afar, could we record something good enough quality online? And, you know, she provided all the support for that. We figured it all out, and she also helped with all the editing and, you know, setting everything up. So it was like, I think having that longer period of time really, really helped the work form. And I was also able to really slowly think about the space. And so I really, really love this gallery space, because I actually don't like a lot of gallery spaces that I'm asked to work in, often industrial spaces or former industrial spaces. They're not at a human scale, and they can be just really quite bland. And to me, this is quite a evocative space. I mean, what you're saying about the floor and the sort of civic architecture, you know, it's at this human scale. it's big without being scary big, to my mind. It's the perfect size, and it's rather like, I did a show a few years ago at Camden Arts Centre in what they call Gallery 3, which is the big sort of light-filled room there, and it's a similar-ish proportion, and to me it's the perfect size, because you can do something big and impactful without it being like monumental, you know. And I absolutely love the curve, and even when I had a completely different idea for a different piece of work that might end up coming out in about 10 years' time somewhere else, but I really wanted to not put anything on the walls, because I really enjoyed the curve and the very particular subtlety of the room, and I was keen to include some living materials and plants, but also, you know, it's quite a dark space in many ways, it's not super bright. So it was about thinking, well, what could we have in there? So I ended up working with a lot of dried material, and then thinking about the layout of the meadow once I decided on this sort of meadow idea, how that would adapt to the space and how it would adapt to the voices within it. So ended up, at one point I thought it'd be a lot more voices than what I had, but it's 5 voices in the piece, and the meadow is kind of in 5 chunks. So that chunk's Frankie, this is Henry, this is Ali, Roger, and Tails in that back corner, and so they kind of embodied these people in a way, and we used all this dried material, so I had so much support collecting the material. We were kind of panicking, would we have enough? It was so hard to judge the quantity. It was very much, the idea was very much specific to the season, because I knew, you know, in September, October, you start getting all these dried, everything reached its crescendo, but it started to dry out. So it was the perfect time to harvest, like in the Republican calendar is the harvest time. So it was the time to harvest all these weeds and so on. And so yeah, it was about tuning it into that time. It would be a really hard work to do at another time of year, actually, because you just wouldn't be able to get the material. So much in here was foraged. And my original idea was to create what I saw as like flashpoints. So I had this quote in my head from Walter Benjamin, who wrote about the job of the revolutionary historian is to try and seize the image as it flashes by. And I kept on thinking about this flash, and I wanted to put into the meadow these like points where the plant life was alive. So that's where you have these sort of subtle points of red coming out, but with a different kind of feel, so for the different voices that are within it. So it's almost like their voices kind of ignited the, what's the right word, the sort of life really of the material.
Interestingly, I was looking at it today and I was seeing the dried material as being historic. Mm-hmm. So I was seeing these as the historic voices that were helping and supporting the living voices. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how one can metamorphose, or not metamorphose, metamorpho.
Mm-hmm. Make a metaphor.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think there's so many metaphors with plants and with ideas, you know, to do with dispersal and germination, and rhizomes and all those wonderful things.
Yeah.
Dormancy.
Can you say a bit more about how you chose the people you were working with and what they came to mean to you?
Yeah, so I wanted to record these interviews. So I after the Zoom events, there was a particular event with the theatre writer John McCann, where he created a class, it was a play class, and we had a discussion about how people first experience dissent in their life and their sort of formation of dissent. And That was in the back of my mind, and I was saying to you earlier that around the time I was developing the work, I had what I felt like was some sort of almost transcendental type experience where I was involved in a local protest near where I live, that's now been referred to in the press as the Battle of Kenmure Street, where local people stopped a Home Office immigration van from taking two men from their homes who were Indian nationals, and the road was physically blocked and thousands of people came, and I'm sure you all know about the event. It was on the front page of a lot of the newspapers the next day, and it was just the most extraordinarily uplifting experience after lockdown, and also after what I feel has been years of attending things like protests and having that initial excitement and sense of solidarity, and it feels great, but knowing in the back of your mind that is this really going to make any kind of difference? I was at art school, I was finished in 2002, so it was that, Afghanistan. I filmed protest marches when I was at art school because I was interested in that sort of culture. I filmed protests against the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 with the Stop the War coalition here, and then took part in the Iraq War demonstrations and so on. So I've been very interested in protest culture for a long time, and to then take part in this event and witness this event work, the community defeated Priti Patel in that moment, and it was just incredible, and the whole community was buzzing afterwards. And Henry talks about it. Henry talks about it much more eloquently than I do, and so I wanted to talk to him about Kenmure Street, and I wanted to talk to these individuals about particular moments of dissent that I know that they were key players in, without saying too much about what those particular events were. I didn't want to get into a factual history with them. I wanted to capture that energy and that sense of liberation that comes with being involved in those events. And after I recorded those interviews, so I ended up with about 9-10 hours of material, I then thought, well, could I make something out of this that's fictional? And I did exactly what I said I wouldn't do. I was saying, I felt like there was a degree of trust with all those people, but I did say to one of them, the person who I know less well, I'm not going to manipulate your words. But then that is what I ended up doing with her permission, was to take their words and create a scene. So the audio piece paints a picture of a day that took place, where it has this, suggests that a larger scale moment of revolution has occurred, and that Teo at one point says that young people have toppled the establishment, and so you get this sense that more has happened.
Mm. Mm. I'm sort of speechless, really, because I just think it's so fantastic that acknowledgement that Priti Patel was defeated on that occasion. It was fantastic, and I am so pleased to find that was an important sort of catalyst for you in the production of this work. I wonder if you can, one of the things that I was really struck by, both in listening to Frankie and also reading, I don't know whether you know Ruth's other work, but there's a work that is called Asking Out, from a project that you made at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, I think in 2012?
It was 2019.
Oh, it was much more recently. I got muddled up, sorry. 2019, and you might want to say a bit about that work, but in it, one of the things that I found very moving and very interesting was the way in which catastrophe in people's lives can actually sometimes lead to something that becomes very creative. And that certainly looked like it was the case. I don't know that it was the case, but I think it reads like it was the case in the book that I was reading from that project. There's a man who's quoted in it called Dave Wilders, and one of the things that as you read about him, you realise that this bloke is really pretty amazing. He's a former miner who then ends up getting involved with art that he couldn't have got involved, or was unlikely he would have got involved with, had he not had the most terrible work accident that left him paraplegic. And I was struck listening to Frankie about this, not the same sort of thing, but knowing a bit about her work as a singer and then becoming blind, and her carrying on regardless and developing new areas of work as a result of that. I found that interesting, and I don't want to romanticize it at all. But certainly in the 80s, it was my experience working with disabled adults who'd acquired disability, that for a lot of them, if they were working class, they were given opportunities to work with art, which they readily took and developed with because of becoming disabled. And I suspect that there isn't provision these days, and that the whole idea of losing work has become so catastrophic in people's lives that actually the chances of something potentially good coming out of it is really difficult to imagine. I just wonder if you've got anything to say about that, but also about the ways in which friction can create creative work, maybe, let's say.
Yeah, I think that thing about friction is interesting and kind of pushing back against something. I mean, I really think that is, well, possibly why I was drawn to these people in particular and wanting to talk to them, was I feel like there were people who sort of pushed back despite particular circumstances. But also I think there's a sense of a sort of decorum in how they speak. And I think the same goes for Dave Wilder. So, and I've, there's been people I've worked with through the years, like so many people I can think of, like young people as well in schools. You remember these moments of really important exchange and idea kind of transfer, and completely both ways, always both ways, and like you learn so much from these people, I think. And this sort of, I don't want to sort of rose tint anything, but it's this sort of spirit that comes from so many of the people that I've worked with and interviewed and material I've collected. I think that, that's what feeds me, and then I want to share, as I said, I wanted to share that with an audience as well. And seizing hold of this thing, as a thing, voice, idea, whatever it is, energy, and then trying to, whether it's a voice in the present or it could also equally be a voice from the past. So often I'm working with material or quotes or lyrics, that I find and pick up from centuries and centuries ago. So there's a sense of collecting a lot of the time as well, and not just collecting plants and material and creating large scale things, but also kind of collecting people's stories. And I've recorded interviews with people over the years that I haven't used for anything, just because I felt like I wanted to record it for posterity.
Yeah. One of the things that I think you just expressed very clearly and made it may be just my answer to you in this, in a way, is that in Roncier's The Ignorant Schoolmaster, Christine Ross, who's the translator into English, writes a very brilliant introduction where she explains that the motivation for this, for him writing it, was actually because in the Mitterrand government there was an argument basically between two ministers, one who wanted to impose a type of school education, formal education, that was absolutely about kind of testing and equalising, offering ideas of equality in the schooling of a high standard. Because the argument from this minister was that if everybody had a decent education, they would then be able to earn enough money, and that would emancipate the working class, basically. As opposed to the other minister who lost the argument, who wanted much more kind of creativity and independence of thought and so on. The kind of more, I would call it the kind of child development ideas of Winnicott, or the kind of the mid-century ideas around individual expression and so on and so forth that developed in education. And that was actually rejected, and we can see the same sorts of arguments losing out to the testing regime that has now dominated formal education since the 1980s. Well, the national curriculum came in, I think it was 89, since that period, basically. I think you just expressed very vividly why one might argue for the creativity aspect, because you talked about decorum. And for me, you have to have, in order to stand up to power, you have to have a strength, a sense of your own agency. And in order to have a sense of your own agency, you have to have experienced love, and you also have to have been allowed to be yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not given that, freedom to develop that critical consciousness, then you've got, Bell Hooks talks about this relationship between the sort of dominator thinking and the development of critical consciousness coming in this way, and it's that constant tension within, even within my own, experience of teaching, and how much do you want to kind of push, and how much do you want people to push back? And I remember someone saying to me the most valuable thing someone taught them at school was to question everything, and I think that really boils that down, isn't it? How do you, or what Paulo Freire writes about the pedagogy of the oppressed, that education either exists as this instrumentalization or a way of creating, I can't remember the exact quote, but creating freedom of thought and this sort of critical inquiry, and that was why the quote, this "No More Boss Class History," really got me, because it was this kind of fight back to that dominator thinking.
Where did that come from?
So it was from a magazine that is, I think it's from a series called Blackboard, and it featured an image from it on the invite for the show. It's a deturned image of the Bash Street Kids.
I saw it.
With a caricature of Ted Heath at the front. So it's from 1972. It was published by the Moss Side Press, and on the front of it is it's a Dennis the Menace knockoff, saying all over the world schooling has an anti-educational effect on society. And a lot of the content, I suspect, is written to look like it comes from young people. I suspect a lot of it comes from the maker of the magazine, Not Young People. Like a lot of those deschooling magazines, I think were kind of fake, like the Children's Angry Brigade and so on. But anyway, regardless of that.
And of course the Beano comes from Dundee, right?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
I was in the Beano fan club. What can I say?
I think we've got to open it up in a moment. I just want to mention that the woman whose name I couldn't remember, and it's not anything to do with her, and I hope it wasn't disrespectful. It's Tamara Krikorian. So I just needed to let you know that.
All right. Okay. I think that's perhaps, we should call it an evening, but. I would like to thank our speakers for your stimulating conversations and share your thoughts around the exhibition, but the other, debates, discussions around the Ignorant Art School, pedagogy and education. And I would also like to thank everybody who joined us this evening. And it's just delightful to see everybody in real life be here. So should we give an applause to our speakers? Thank you.